Attention all personnel, we are conducting a blast on Unit 1 and
2. Making a building can take months, sometimes even years, but demolishing one takes just seconds. Yet those few seconds, if not done cautiously, can go horribly wrong. From a hospital implosion that killed a 12-year-old girl,
boats on the lake and crowds on the other shore were showered with debris, shards of steel warped and twisted by the force of the blast. The 12-year-old girl was hit and instantly killed.
To a power plant demolition in springfields that left thousands of people without electricity.
Get out of here!
We are going through the list of building demolitions that went horribly wrong. Number 16, Pontiac Silverdome. For many years, the Pontiac Silverdome stood as a shadow of its former self. It was a reminder of better days gone by. Once seen as a symbol of greatness, this iconic stadium had seen its fair share of glory. It was the place to be when the Detroit Lions kicked off their first NFL game on October 6, 1975, at the then state-of-the-art Pontiac Metropolitan Stadium. Back then, millions of Americans watched in awe as the team debuted their sleek new home that had an impressive 80,000 seats. But that was just the beginning. This iconic arena would soon become the center stage for mega events like the Pope's visit, the World Cup, and the Super Bowl. However, as the saying goes, all good things must surely come to an end. In 2017, when the venue was scheduled for demolition, marking the end of an era, it first began with the aim of carrying out a partial demolition that would take down the upper part of the structure. The engineers in charge of this project had no doubt that this demolition would be a success, since it took them a whole year to plan everything in detail. But what happened next left them stunned. The upper concourse was lined with huge explosives as everyone waited to see it implode into pieces. But instead of going out with a bang, the entire event ended up in disappointment. Because aside from a few puffs of smoke, not much else happened. But why would such an expensive project end up as a failure? Well, according to the company in charge of the demolition project, 10% of the explosive failed to go off. That's the reason why the upper section of the Silverdome failed to go down. Just when you think that the previous implosion was a disaster, this next one is even crazier. Number 15, Liverpool Tower Blocks. The saying, "they just don't build them like they used to," takes on a whole new meaning in this demolition project that took place in Seaforth, Liverpool. Two old tower blocks from the 1960s, which had seen better days, were set to be demolished in April 2016. A lot of time and money was invested into making sure this project was carried out swiftly and safely. Hundreds of residents in Seaforth, Merseyside, gathered to count down to the moment the block towers came crashing down, but were left scratching their heads when nothing happened. The explosive went off as the 6 tower blocks were set to come down, but to the surprise of everyone, only 4 of these blocks came down. A second attempt led to the collapse of one of the tower blocks, but the second one failed to budge. Eventually, the crew settled to use cable to tie around the bottom of the building, and that managed to do the trick. But the worst part about this demolition project was that residents who had been living nearby had to evacuate their homes. A large number of them were forced to spend their nights at the hotel. While that ended on a sad note, let's move on to another demolition that actually imploded but had an unexpected twist. Number 14, the Vordingborg Silo Implosion. On April 2018, curious onlookers came to watch the implosion of this towering 53-meter-tall silo. As the explosion began, spectators cheered at the sight and at the sound of the building coming down. But what happened next took a dramatic turn. Instead of falling at its initial angle, the silo fell the wrong way, toppling towards the waterfront library and music school. Fortunately, there were no casualties, as both of the buildings were evacuated before the explosions took place. All that was damaged was part of the administrative offices, and most of the books at the library were covered in a thick layer of dust. Seeing the amount of damage done, the Vordingborg local government immediately called for the assistance of the fire department to to help secure the cultural center to avoid further damages. However, that leaves the question, what exactly went wrong during the demolition? An investigation was later carried out, and it was later found that the explosives were not properly set, resulting in the building falling in the opposite direction. Talk about a blast gone wrong, but wait till you see this next demolition project that was an even bigger flop. Number 13. Harworth Pit Tower. Built in the early 1910s, this 78-metre-tall coal mining company in Nottinghamshire, England, served generations. Yet, after almost a century of being in service, it was abandoned in 2006 due to trouble at its seam. However, on April 2016, a demolition project was set to destroy this coal landmark. Dozens of people turned out early to watch it collapse, but they were left in disbelief as the explosion carried out failed to do more than create a cloud of dust. Seeing that this failed, the crew then attempted to use a machine to bring it down, but that didn't work either. What started as a normal day in anticipation to see a building demolished sadly ended in disappointment. But little did they know, the real show was yet to come. The next day, without warning, the 78-metre structure suddenly surrendered to gravity, crumbling to the ground in a breathtaking display. Unfortunately, the hundreds of onlookers who gathered the day before were nowhere to be seen, missing the moment they had eagerly waited for. Unlike the Harworth Pit Tower, this next demolition didn't keep people waiting, but what happened next will leave you speechless. Number 12. Turkish Flour Factory. Sometimes, some building structures that are meant to be demolished are so old that they've practically fallen apart. And this calls for demolition experts to safely carry out extensive research on the best way to have the building removed, causing them to rely on records or blueprints on how the building was built. However, in some cases, some building plans are nowhere to be found. This was the case of the Turkish flour plant in Kankiri, central Turkey. Originally built in 1928, this building was abandoned after the company went bankrupt, causing it to slowly deteriorate. However, in the early 2000s, the building, barely holding together, was scheduled for demolition to pave the way for a new shopping centre. This made the engineers feel that there wasn't much to be done since the building was practically in shambles. But when the explosive detonated, the unthinkable happened. Instead of the building crumbling down, the 25-metre-high structure rolled over onto its roof, breathtakingly close to flats housing dozens of residents. But eventually the former flour factory ground to a halt, leaving clouds of dust in its wake. Luckily, there were no casualties. Speaking of excavators, check out this next demolition project that almost took the life of an excavator worker. Number 11. Avondale Mills Smokestack. Not all demolitions go off without a hitch. Sometimes they can be quite difficult, especially after more than one attempt. All that is left is for it to be carried out manually, and this needs to be done with caution because any sudden mistake can be fatal. On November 2015, a 180-foot smokestack was set to be demolished. But after 2 unsuccessful attempts, the detonating explosive failed to bring the tall structure down. Tim Pfeiffer, one of the excavators on the site, made the bold decision to tear down the smokestack bit by bit, a calculated risk that would test his skills to the limit. But in the blink of an eye, his bold plan turned into a nightmare. The tall structure came crashing down with a deafening force, briefly trapping Pfeiffer inside the machine underneath hundreds of pounds of bricks and debris. Members of his team instantly rushed in to help, fearing that Pfeiffer might have been injured. But in a breathtaking twist, Pfeiffer came out of the wreckage, shaken but alive. His miraculous escape left many breathless. This incident would definitely be etched in the memories of his colleagues forever. Just like this demolition project, many haven't still gotten over the failed demolition of this century-old bridge. Number 10. The Broadway Bridge. A 93-year-old bridge that was said to be structurally deficient proved not so weak after all when a demolition team tried to bring it down with powerful explosives. Despite the charges going off like it was initially planned, the old century bridge refused to go down. When the smoke cleared, the steel arch and deck stood damaged but unmoved over the Arkansas River. People who had gathered to watch reacted with gasps as the explosives went off, but then broke into murmurs and laughter as it became clear that the bridge was not going anywhere. A few pieces of wood dislodged by the explosions floated down the river, but apart from that, the old steel bridge, which was supposed to collapse into the muddy waters within 30 seconds, stayed solid. The bridge finally came down, but after much fighting. Crews first tied a cable to the north side of the span and tied it to yank it down using a barge pulled by a tug. When that failed, they moved the cable to the center and gave it 2 more goes. The first time, the old bridge didn't move an inch, but the second time it was visibly weak-ended. It was only on the third attempt, when a second tug was added to the barge to give more power, that the massive structure finally fell into the Arkansas River, ending 90 years of history and nearly 5 hours of acute embarrassment. As embarrassing as that was, you'd think it couldn't get any worse, but this next demolition might top that. Number 9. Feed mill in South Dakota. On December 3, 2005, Sioux Falls witnessed an unforgettable spectacle. The 202-foot zip feed mill, a towering grain elevator and feed mill, was supposed to crumble in a controlled demolition. But the law of physics had other plans. Following a storied history that spanned decades, the mill, which had been in operation since 1956, but ceased operations in 2000, was set for demolition. A great number of onlookers gathered eager to witness the iconic building's final moments. Expecting a cloud of dust and crumbling concrete, they watched in awe as the controlled demolition unfolded. Unfortunately, they were about to be disappointed because when the explosive went off, only the building's foundation was blown away, causing the building to fall straight down like it was meant to. But the rest of the structure was still intact. A review of the demolition project proved that the crew had seriously underestimated the amount of cutting explosive required to break the structure's vertical integrity. Over the next 2 weeks, a crane and a wrecking ball were used to complete the demolition. In the end, the jaw-dropping failure has become one of the most iconic moments, forever etched in the collective memory of those who witnessed it. Our next demolition project was supposed to be a success, but things took a shocking and disastrous turn. Number 8. St. Petersburg Sport Complex in Russia. Officially opened on May 20, 1980, this gigantic stadium had seen better days. From hosting world-class music concerts to several major games, the St. Petersburg Sports Complex had the capacity to hold up to 25,000 spectators. However, in 2019, it finally closed its doors and was set for demolition in 2020, paving the way for a new sports complex to be built in time for the 2023 Ice Hockey World Championship. So in order to bring the aging stadium down, workers began to make precision cuts around the stadium. Their goal was to control the collapse when the explosive went off to ensure a safe and controlled teardown. However, the outcome would be devastating. The team finally made progress as they successfully separated the roof from the walls. But in an instant, disaster struck. Without warning, the entire structure came crashing down, trapping the workers beneath the rubble. Tragically, one of the workers lost their lives in the sudden and unexpected collapse. A drone footage shows the man with a blowtorch cutting through the metal support just before the massive structure collapses. He can be seen trying to make a run to the safety of the cage, suspended from a crane, but sadly he couldn't make it in time. The body of the 29-year-old was later found in the rubble, making this one of the saddest demolitions in recent history. But this next demolition was even more heartbreaking, leaving a permanent scar on the heart of everyone who witnessed the implosion. Number 7. Royal Canberra Hospital Implosion. On July 13, 1997, a large number of spectators gathered at a safe distance from the hospital, eager to witness its demolition. But little did they know that things were about to take a turn for the worst. Just 2 years earlier, the Australian government agreed with the Australian Capital Territory government to exchange certain sites of land in Canberra. This new site would help make way for the construction of the National Museum of Australia. And what better land to choose than a hospital building already deteriorating? The demolition project was closely watched and carefully planned for over 2 years to ensure everything went off without a hitch. Knowing it would attract a lot of interest, the ACT government decided to make it public, creating a viewing area for the hospital's implosion. At least knowing that the first hospital in Canberra was about to be demolished was something exciting to watch. and the news spread like wildfire, drawing over 100,000 people eager to watch their once-beloved hospital crash down. However, their excitement was short-lived as the implosion of the Royal Canberra Hospital turned into a nightmare. Despite all the measures taken to make this safe, the explosion grew larger than anticipated, and the impact of the falling building was too great to contain. The debris started shooting out of the dust cloud at a high speed, reaching distances of up to 500 meters away from the construction site. Unfortunately, many of the onlookers who were in the line of fire were severely injured, and a young girl named Katie tragically lost her life. Despite the many casualties, it may be shocking to know that the building didn't completely fall apart. Workers had to finish the job by hand. And as for little Katie, a memorial was erected to remember her by. Here's another demolition of a vintage building that really made an impression in the hearts of all who witnessed it. Number 6. Clarion Hotel. Las Vegas is no stranger to demolition projects. As a city known for its impressive architectural beauty, many of its former buildings had been torn down to make way for newer structures. And most of the time, each demolition project is executed flawlessly. But that can't be said about the Clarion Hotel. This impressive casino was one of Las Vegas' finest hotels in the 1970s. It included a 12-story hotel with approximately 200 rooms and a small casino. Over the years, when Hollywood actress Debbie Reynolds purchased the property in 1992, it went through a big renovation, which included a museum to show off her collection of Hollywood memorabilia. Eventually, as the years passed, after shifting ownership repeatedly, the building soon lost its glory and was scheduled to be demolished in 2015. But as you can rightfully guess, this demolition didn't go as planned. The 2-ton explosive detonated as the building came crumbling down. After the dust cleared, to the surprise of everyone, what was left standing at a height of 100 feet was the elevator shaft. The remainder of the building began to lean, with some of the pieces falling down ever so slightly. This became a safety hazard as the rest of the structure fell straight down in a giant plum of dirt. In the end, it took an Old West method of manually breaking it for demolition workers to topple the final tower left standing. That might have been quite difficult to destroy, but our next demolition surprisingly went well. However, it still had its own dire consequences. Number 5. Crawford Station Demolition. There aren't many demolition sites that have a scarred history, like the Crawford Station power plant in the South Lawndale community of Chicago, Illinois. Built back in 1924, this century-old power plant was a coal-fired power plant that had a number of accidents with a total of 5 deaths. However, the situation took a turn for the worse when the power plant began polluting the environment, sparking a community outcry. The protest eventually led to the plant's closure in 2012, bringing an end to the environmental concerns. Being one of the oldest and last-standing coal-generating power plants in the USA, it was about time it had a closure. With its demolition scheduled for 2019, the project seems doomed from the very beginning. On December 30th, 2019, during its demolition process, a worker fell to his death, causing the demolition project to be halted. The demolition work started again the next year. Then on April 11th, 2020, the big concrete smokestack was blown up. Now, unlike the many other structures on this list, the smokestack demolition was executed flawlessly, coming down straight like it was supposed to. However, the success was short-lived, as the project took an alarming turn when it unleashed a massive cloud of toxic dust that completely covered the little village neighborhood, putting residents' health at risk and causing widespread concern. Soon enough, a class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of the residents whose health may have been at risk. Despite the successful implosion, the entire situation was an absolute mess. The demolition company's negligence shows that they didn't prioritize community safety, causing one to wonder if they could have done things a little differently. Number 4. Springfield Smokestack Demolition. What happens when the removal of a structure in a power plant doesn't go as planned? Well, you are about to find out. Because this demolition project takes us to the city of Springfield, Ohio, where we're about to see a 275-foot smokestack come crashing down. On November 2018, the local community of Springfield gathered around to watch the demolition of one of the oldest smokestacks that has been since 1927 in the former Ohio Edison Mad River power plant. It even got the attention of a local news network who came to witness the event. However, what happened next was what they least expected. After a brief countdown, the charge was detonated and the tower began to fall. The only problem was that the smokestack toppled in the wrong direction, causing spectators to hide for cover. Instead of the building falling safely, it knocked down two active 12,000-volt power lines, cutting power for thousands of nearby residents. And to make matters worse, it also crashed into a building housing backup generators. So what went wrong? According to the demolition crew, the explosion was detonated correctly, but an undetected crack on the south side threw everything off. The structure tilted the wrong way, taking them by surprise. Despite the fact that no one was injured, the demolition caused about 4,000 residents to be left without light. Unlike the several videos we've seen, this next demolition project didn't require the use of thousands or millions of dollars. Number 3. Silo demolition fail. Sometimes, especially in the countryside, property owners often take matters into their own hands by manually dismantling structures to reduce risk and maximize saving. So that's why in this footage we can see a farmer trying to demolish a sturdy silo by hand. With determination, he repeatedly strikes the structure with an aim to weaken its foundation. After several trials, the building finally begins to crumble. However, things didn't quite go according to plan. Instead of crumbling gradually, the silo comes crashing down with the majority of the structure still intact. Fortunately, the farmer doesn't give up. With the aid of a trusty tractor, he manages to break down the remaining structure, finally succeeding in his mission. This rustic method may not be the most glamorous, but it definitely got the job done. We've seen some horrible building demolitions so far, but this next one was a total nightmare. Number 2. Anglesey Power Station Implosion. Demolishing an old power plant is no easy feat, especially when it's a structure that stood the test of time, like the Anglesey Power Station, which had been generating electricity since 1969. This brown coal-powered thermal power station in Anglesey, Australia, had served its community well, but its time finally came to an end. In 2018, the plant was slated for demolition. As the construction crew was putting things in place to help demolish the old power plants, curious onlookers gathered around to watch from a safe distance. After hours of waiting, a spark exploded inside the building as two steel structures on either side of the plant crumbled to the ground in a thunderous collapse. But alas, most of the story building was still standing, making the 3-hour wait a total disappointment. But that soon became the least of their problems, as the demolition of the project caused a great amount of dust to rise above the power plant. This was a health risk. Fortunately, Aloka, the parent company of the power plant, had taken proactive measures to help control this risk. They said they've already taken every precaution to help eliminate asbestos risk, including a 12-month asbestos removal program. Despite the initial hiccups, the structure eventually came down, finally marking the end of an era for the Anglesey Power Station. And it's true, all eras must come to an end, but the next demolition project refused to go down without a fight. Number 1. Australian Beer Silo. On May 2013, Brisbane, Australia, witnessed an unforgettable demolition attempt. An old beer silo, once an important storage facility for malt at Red Bank Ipswich's brewery, was slated for demolition. The demolition crew carefully packed 100 kilograms of explosives inside the towering structure. But after the explosives went off, a massive explosion rocked the site, but the crowd's anticipation quickly turned to confusion. Instead of crumbling, the silo stubbornly tilted to one side, refusing to yield. It was clear that this building wasn't going down without a fight. Eventually, the demolition crew decided to demolish it manually. For 40 intense minutes, they worked tirelessly, providing the extra push needed to bring the 4,000-ton building crashing down. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.